Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Pete Hodgson.
Mr. Chairman, the member who's just resumed his seat is the chair of the all-powerful Finance and Expenditure Committee, and he said that he's very proud because inflation is low. And he also said that under the previous government it ran north of 5%. Well, which year? Which year, Mr. Chairman of the Finance and Expenditure Committee? Which year? The only year when inflation has been at 5% is the year we're in now, under your government. That's the truth of the matter. So let's have... I could pick on that member's speech, any part of it, but the last part will do. It was full of factual inaccuracies, as is the case commonly across this debate, Mr. Speaker. This country went into deficit 3 years ago, and on the change of government 2.5 years ago. The big deal, the following few months later, in April 2009, the big deal was tax cuts for the rich. So let's get that said again. Our nation started running at a loss, our books, our official books, started running at a loss, and the big response, the big public policy response was to cut tax on the rich. Not smart. That's the first point. Therefore, we had to borrow more to pay for those tax cuts than we would have had we not made those tax cuts. That's just arithmetic. We are borrowing to pay for tax cuts for rich people. It's irresponsible, it's ideological, it's very expensive, and in part one we had a chance to revisit it. We argued it for hours and the government said no, tax cuts for rich people stay where they are. We are not going to reverse them. They are reversing them in many other jurisdictions, but not here. Not here. We are not reversing tax cuts for the rich. So we're going to have to find our money from somewhere else, and therefore we go to part two of this legislation and we find that it's coming out of working for families, and we find that it's coming out of KiwiSaver. Now remember that the government says that they don't like the idea of having to borrow and then put money into KiwiSaver accounts. Let me quote the Minister of Finance in his speech. It's a very short quote. It means that the government is borrowing to contribute to private savings. This does not lift national savings, said the Finance Minister. He's correct. If one borrows $1, a government borrows $1 from offshore and puts it into Clayton Cosgrove's KiwiSaver account, the national savings are not improved, but nor are they worsened. However, if you borrow money and give it to Clayton Cosgrove as a tax cut, this saving gets worse. So we've got a government that says we do not want to borrow to sustain KiwiSaver, but we, in part two of this legislation, but we are really happy to borrow until our eyes water to pay for tax cuts for rich people. That is not fair. That is not just. It is not right. And I'm angry about it. Tell you something about KiwiSaver. KiwiSaver is not the preserve of rich people. KiwiSaver is something that everyone does. We were surprised when we got started at how popular it was amongst low-income earners and middle-income earners, as well as high-income earners. I agree with Craig Foss when he says that it is not rational to not be part of a KiwiSaver account because you get $1,000 for nothing, just to get started. I mean, I agree with that. So it stands to reason that KiwiSaver is something that can be found across all parts of society. And yet all parts of society are now going to get it in the neck twice. Less money from the government into KiwiSaver because they can't bear to borrow for that. They will borrow for tax cuts, but they won't borrow for this. and then a requirement on those half of the KiwiSaver contributors who are on 2% to lift their savings to 3%, because the National Party is concerned about savings. Well, if they are that concerned about savings, the way to, Mr Chairman, the way to fix, Mr Chairman, if they are that concerned about savings, the way to fix that is to lift it from 2% to 3% or 2% to 4% if they wish, and retain the government contribution and pay for that by reversing out the tax cuts on the rich. Easy. Easy. At that point, two things happen. Our savings get even better, and boy do we know that our savings in this country are in need of getting better, especially in the private sector. We know that. The second thing that happens, and the second leg of the double, is that if you reverse out the tax cuts for the rich, you improve the current account. You improve the balance of payments, because rich people spend disproportionately on imports. Why? Because they can. The classic one is an overseas trip. So if we wanted to look at what this country needs most of all, it's to reduce our debt by improving our savings, not in the government, but across the entire economy, improving our savings so we can own more and more of our own country instead of less and less of it, and to improve our exports. Part one of this legislation, by not reversing tax cuts on the rich, therefore makes the current account worse. Part two of this legislation, by not backing Kiwis to save, makes our saving record worse. It is not okay to take a scheme as popular as this and to make changes as large as this twice in 2.5 years. It destroys confidence. It is an opt-out scheme, so that's a saving grace. It may be that people will just continue to fall into it. But my goodness, this is an economically reckless budget for those reasons. Leaving aside the effect it has on this family with so many kids on this many dollars and what's happening to their amount of money per week. Leaving aside all that, sticking only with macroeconomics, sticking only with what's good for the nation. Why is it that we are in this House under urgency deciding that we are not going to reverse tax cuts for rich people, thereby improving our current account, and we are going to further damage our savings record, which is appalling? Why is it that this government, faced with the choices of needing to get money from somewhere, we earnestly agree with that. The deficit must come down. Why have they chosen that way? What is good about that, apart from the fact that it is ideologically suitable for them? It is ideologically suitable for them to use the sophistry that tax cuts are fine because it causes people to somehow create jobs instead of spending money on overseas trips. Who believes that? And that cutting savings, cutting the government crown contribution to KiwiSaver is also fine because they've mandated that everyone's going to lose 1% of their income if they're on 2% because they've got to go to 3% because that's what the government says. Not very bright. Not very fair, but that's another speech. It's economically dumb. And the government needs to be told off roundly for their economic stupidity. Let's have them get up and defend it. Let's have them get up instead of lowering their heads, every one of them. Look at them. Not one of them looking me in the eye. Oh, we got one or two of them pretending to now. Well, we've now got them awakened. We've even got Rodney Hyde awake. Let's one of them take the call. One of them take the call now and refute my analysis. Refute my analysis that this country needs to save more and this country needs to export more, and both parts of this bill damage both of those goals. That's the essential thesis.
Easy, Toe, easy.
And I wonder if Tohanari would like to get up and refute that. It'd be an interesting bit of analysis from him. Let's just see what he has to say, or what Rodney Hyde has to say, or what anyone else would have to say about that analysis. Far better, given that we've got a $17 billion deficit, far better to pay attention to reversing the tax cuts and retain attention on maintaining savings.
Mr Chairman. Honourable Peter Dunn.